The city of Tacoma, Washington has passed some of the most strict renter protections in the entire country. They would ban landlords from winter and school year evictions, would force them to pay relocation assistance, and essentially cap rent increases. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's an update to what's going on in Tacoma, Washington. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is some of the most strict rules and regulations I've seen in the entire country. And that's saying a lot considering that Tacoma's in the same state as Seattle, okay? But these laws, these regulations that were recently passed by voters, I mean, they're bad news. They're very, very bad news for the landlords and the property owners up there because they take away your property rights. They take away your ability to operate your business effectively, and they force you to basically subsidize the living of your tenants. So they don't want you to have the ability to remove tenants during the school year for households with students in them, which, you know, most people have kids. So guess what? That's most of the households. Then they also don't want you to be able to evict people during the winter time, and you know that's ridiculous in itself as well because we're talking about 6 months a year is the winter. I mean, according to what most people consider the cold months. They say, oh well, this is to help people from becoming homeless. What a joke. Okay, it is a complete joke. It is a farce, and it has only to do with them wanting to dictate who a landlord rents their property to. And meanwhile, a landlord would be taking months on end of losses as these tenants sit there and live for free in their housing. So like I said, when I said that a landlord would be subsidizing the housing, I meant it. So one of the worst things I saw, part of their new laws, is the fact that they want a landlord, if they increase the rent of more than 5% in a single year, well, they have to pay relocation assistance. Okay, relocation assistance. Are you kidding me? If the tenant can't afford the rent and they need to go, they just need to go. It isn't the landlord doesn't have, oh well, you can't afford to move, so here's a bonus for doing nothing. Well, you know what that's going to do? That's going to make landlords want to drive up their rental costs to cover these potential losses. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. What do you think of these new landlord-tenant laws? I might not be describing them very well, but I'm going to go into more detail as I go through the article. The article does a really good job of exactly saying what was passed and what exactly is going to happen. They're saying that the city itself is not going to enforce these laws, and that the courts will be the means by which the tenants will, by which the law is enforced, right? And in a way, it's good, and in a way, it's bad. You think to yourself, okay, as a landlord, I might be able to slide under the table and not exactly follow this law and not get in trouble for it because the city isn't actively enforcing it, right? And there's going to be some landlords who decide to do that sort of thing, right? But at the same time, a tenant could take you to court, and not only will you end up with huge legal fees, but you'll also end up having to pay this tenant tens of thousands of dollars in bonuses. That's what I consider relocation assistance. It's a bonus for the tenant. So, or you won't be able to evict a tenant who is screwing you completely over and not paying their rent. That's not what we want to see. We want to see the tenants who are not paying their rent get them the heck out of there. Okay. So anyway, let me get into this article and tell you what it says. This article is coming from mynorthwest.com, and it says Tacoma's renters' rights measure is in effect, but the city won't enforce it. And yeah, the title's a little misleading because when they say the city won't enforce it, that doesn't mean it's not going to be enforced, or that the law is not really being implemented. It is being implemented. So anyway, let's get into it. A new law aimed at protecting renters' rights took effect in Tacoma Friday, but the city won't be enforcing it. Instead, affected parties will need to rely on the court system. The ordinance is called the 2023 Landlord Fairness Code Initiative, also known as Measure 1 or Tacoma's Tenant Bill of Rights. City of Tacoma voters narrowly approved the measure during the November 2023 election. It passed by just 370 votes, with 50.4% of voters in favor of passing the bill, while 49.6% voted against it. Over 43,000 people registered their votes on the issue. And I always tell everyone, get out and vote. Certain elections, a lot of people, they don't like to participate in them, but in this sort of thing, this is so important. It's important that we get out the message that, hey, this is going to hurt especially the small mom and pop landlords, and it's going to hurt anyone who potentially wants to become a landlord at any point in time. And I know a lot of people, they don't consider themselves landlords, but if you rent out one bedroom inside your house, you're a landlord. If you have an old home that you used to live in and you decide to rent it out, you're a landlord now, okay? And you have to abide by these rules exactly. And if you do not abide by these rules exactly, you are going to suffer the consequences. And this, what it does is it takes away, one, the motivation for people to want to be landlords, but it also punishes good landlords who just didn't know any better, didn't know that they had to follow all these rules, or maybe didn't follow them exactly to the letter of the law. And you had good intentions in mind, but now you're going to suffer the consequences. So it's going to make being a landlord very undesirable for many people. And that means that, hey, you're going to have less affordable housing as less landlords decide to rent out their properties, or as some decide to just exit the business rather than put up with this garbage. These are the most progressive tenants' rights in the entire state, and we have them right here, right now in Tacoma. Ann Dorn, a spokesperson with Tacoma for All, told Kiro News Radio, "I am so thrilled for all the people who will be protected." What's in the Landlord Initiative? As Kiro 7 notes, the new ordinance would include 8 new requirements and rules for landlords and tenants in Tacoma. 2 separate notices will now be required before increasing rent, with the first notice having to be issued between 210 and 180 days before the rent increase, and the second notice between 120 and 90 days. Also, late fees cannot exceed $10 per month, and move-in costs can't exceed 1 month's rent. So let's go over this first part right here, okay? The notice that is required before you can do a rent increase. So if you, let's say you want to raise your tenant's rent by the $50 a month, okay, $50 a month, which would be equivalent to 5% of a $1,000 a month rent. Okay, so you're like, okay, first of all, you have to notify them 210 days before this rent increase. So you do the math on that. There's approximately 30 days in every month. So we're talking about 7 months in advance. So they move in 5 months later. You have to decide right then if you're going to do a rent increase and what that rent increase is going to be for the next year. Now, I'm going to obviously, as a landlord, especially in a place with rent caps in place, I'm going to increase the rent to the maximum allowable by law. So, and I'm guessing that it's the 5%, and we'll get into that 5% number here in just a minute. But it's that $50 a month. So now the rent will go up to 1,050. So, but not only that, but then between 120 and 90 days, you have to notify them again. Hey, rent is increasing in 3 months. So you're sending out all sorts of notices to make sure that these people, they have noticed that the rent is going to go up. So yeah, this is more paperwork burden on the landlord. It's not like, a lot of these landlords, they just have one tenant. As a small landlord, I was managing 16 units by myself. And imagine me trying to send 16 different of these notices every single year, trying to, I have tenants who moved in at different time periods. And, yeah, you can automate that all through a computer program, or, set it up in a scheduling thing. But a lot of small landlords, they don't have this technical background. They don't have the software. They're basing everything on just simple paperwork that they have an Excel spreadsheet. And if they don't get these dates and exactly correct, guess what? Your rent increase is null and void. Your rent increase, you can't do it if you don't do the things exactly as they say. And the other thing they said is no late fees over $10 per month, right? And so some landlords, you don't get grandfathered in, but they will not, they have written into their lease that their late fees are more than that. So they might not know about this law, and they wouldn't know about this law until they get down to the courthouse and are getting sued by the tenant because, or not getting sued, but they're losing their eviction case, or they're losing their case against the tenant, and they because these late fees that they are charging are illegal. And it could be, $5 more, like $5 more per month, and your entire case gets thrown out because you didn't know that, oh well, we dropped the late fees down from $15 to $10 a month. Like I've mentioned many times in the past, a lot of the times they will change laws, and good landlords who were following the law when they started, right, they get screwed over because they didn't know the law changed. It's not like they send an email out to all landlords saying, hey, stop doing, all this stuff that was legal for the last, 20 years. You can't do that anymore. No, you have to hope that you're able to keep up with the news. And some small landlords are not, and they're the ones who get wrapped up into this mess and get screwed over. The big corporate landlords, they have legal teams, they've got bookkeepers, they got accountants, they've got professional property management that keeps track of a lot of these laws, and they follow them. So the small landlords are the ones who really suffer. Landlords will also have severe limitations on when they can pursue an eviction from their property. They may not carry out an eviction during the school year if kids or educators are in the household. Landlords also can't carry out an eviction during cold weather between November 1st and April 1st, and cannot evict a tenant based on their status as a family member of the military, first responder, senior family member, healthcare provider, or educator. So there we go. School year and winter evictions are banned. Woo. Gosh, the problem I have with that sort of thing, like I said, is that we're talking about more than half of the year is blocked off for the grand majority of tenants in terms of when they can be evicted. So if you get a tenant who stops paying rent at the exact, perfect right time, it could be a 9-month period or more before you're finally able to evict that tenant. So imagine that, 9 months out of a 12-month year, 3/4 of the year, you have no way of removing a non-paying tenant. Okay, that's stealing. That is stealing from a landlord to give to somebody who, isn't deserving, who didn't honor their contract and needs to go. The landlords have a right to make money, obviously, but not to the point where it's costing somebody their livelihood or their life, Don Smith, a resident and tenant in Tacoma, told KIRO7. Yeah, you're speaking out you're saying one thing, but you're doing another. Oh, the landlords have a right to make money, but we're going to take away every single opportunity and ability they have to do it. That doesn't make any sense. Just another dumb thing you hear from a tenant. They're like, oh well, you have a right to make money, but we're going to dictate exactly how much you can make. And I was like, well, then I don't have a right to make money because you have no clue how much I need to make to even pay my bills. Okay. Anyway, it says if a tenant can no longer afford their rent after rent was raised 5% or more, and the tenant can no longer afford to occupy the unit, the landlord would have to pay relocation assistance in the following amounts. A 5 to 7% increase would equal 2 times the monthly rent. A 7.5 to 10% increase would equal 2.5 times, and any increases more than 10% would equal 3 times the monthly rent. And that's kind of a a backwards, secretive method of trying to implement rent control. They're trying to say, hey, don't increase the rent over 5%, or you're going to have to pay these extra fees. Okay, that's what this is. It's not anything but that, and it's obvious to anyone looking from the outside that they are trying to strongly discourage people from putting rent increases above 5% by forcing the landlords to pay this relocation assistance. Now, what a joke. Okay, all of these laws, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. I'll put a link to this article in the description so you can read the whole thing and maybe get your own opinion of exactly what's happening. But in my opinion, this is just an attack on landlords. I feel bad for the landlords up in Washington State, but particularly in Tacoma, because this is some of the most strict tenant protections I've seen in any of the articles I've read.